How's your marriage, guys? When's the last time your partner just wanted to jump your bones and give you a good old screw? How's the passion? Is there any heat in your marriage? I don't care how old you are. Is this offensive? How's your marriage going? Is there love, joy, a sense of humor, in your marriage, in your home? Or is that just someone over there I have to put up with? I've got better things to do. How do you feel about your husband or wife? Is it your mission, your goal in life to love them and have a wonderful relationship with them? Because as we know already, I hope, that's how Yahusha feels about his bride. And husbands are to model him and give up their lives for their wives so that they can see, be delivered, follow along on this process, this pathway with us. Or are we just waiting for our wives to get their act together and love us and obey us and do what we want? It's not how it works, is it? Some marriages are a mixture of unbelievers and believers, and some marriages have both of you in the fold. So it's wonderful. We're going to go into marriage today anyway. That's the main thrust of today's thing. Let's have a look. Yahusha says, I hate divorce. I hate divorce. So that's a direct quote. And no matter what illustrations have been given, no matter what permissions have been given, excuses, what have you, don't forget Yahusha hates divorce. Yeah? Even though he divorced Yisrael himself. Doesn't mean divorce isn't around, doesn't mean it's being used, doesn't mean Yahusha didn't do it either. But he hates it. So do we want to do things he hates or that he loves? Let's see where we're going to go today, guys. We're in Deuteronomy 24. I hate divorce. Moses says, now suppose a woman was divorced by her first husband because he found something immoral or unclean about her behavior. So he wrote out divorce papers, gave them to her, and sent her away. Later she married another man who then either divorced her in the same way or he died. Since she's been joined in marriage to her second husband, she cannot marry her first husband again. Why would she want to? That would be an abomination to Yahuwah, and their marriage would pollute the land that he's giving you. So you understand that? She's been divorced once, then she's gone and married again, and then he's either died or doesn't want her anymore, so he's divorced her as well. She is not allowed to go back to the first husband and marry him. That is an abomination. Whenever you see the word abomination, that's pretty serious. That's up there with homosexuality, anal sex, drinking blood, Christmas trees, the whole Asherah, Moloch, sacrificing babies, all that's a pretty big deal. So it's interesting that although we read often in the scriptures about a Hebrew man giving his wife a letter of divorce, there are actually no direct or definite laws of divorce in Moses' writings. Interesting. In other words, while we do find divine laws about marriage and even remarriage, we don't find procedures or rules about how or why divorce was accomplished. Apparently, since divorce was so customary and usual in the Middle East, the Hebrews generally just took it for granted. The divorce protocol was just so common knowledge, that the explanation of them is not even written down in the scripture. We only get hints and pieces in the Psalms, prophets, Proverbs, and in a few of the scriptural narrative stories. So Yahusha doesn't even go into too much detail, because remember, he's talking to these people, even though this book of the scriptures is being used all through time, even for us today, as a help, encouragement, reproof, all these things the scripture says it is for us. Don't forget that he's actually writing to them in the moment. This is for you. He's not writing it for us. We are using it for us because behavior is behavior is behavior is behavior. But this is for them. And they didn't really need to know about divorce because they knew it well, inside and out. So he didn't explain too much about divorce to them. There's not much in there. So, if a man decides to divorce his wife, and then she goes and gets remarried to another man, and then her new husband either dies or he too divorces this woman, she cannot remarry her original husband. Why? Of all the things that could be an abomination, why is that an abomination? A woman going and marrying another man and then coming back to her original husband. Maybe the spark comes back, maybe they hit it off again and they get... No, not allowed. Why? Many believe this divine law was to stop what was essentially a rampant wife-swapping scheme. Wife-swapping scheme all the way back here. There's reality shows about that. Wife-swapping. This divine law was essentially to stop a rampant wife-swapping scheme whereby a man would marry and then by design divorce his wife, take on another wife for a short-term romp in the sack, remarry his first wife, and then repeat this process fairly often with other women. The idea was that by legally marrying and divorcing and marrying again and divorcing again, he would be having his sexual lusts met with different women because technically he was married to each woman, even if it was only for a few days. Therefore, he would not be breaking the divine laws of adultery by having sex outside of his marriage covenant, which is wedlock. Mankind is always looking for loopholes, eh? Always looking for loopholes. But let's be clear, Yahusha does not condone divorce. In fact, in Malachi 2, he says he outright hates it. So you understand what the instruction that Moses is giving is about? The men were, divorcing their wives, remarrying another woman, because they could have multiple wives. I don't know why he divorced her. He could have just married another one, couldn't he? Anyway, he's divorcing his wife. Maybe she wasn't pleased with it. Marrying another woman, even for just a couple of weeks, divorcing her, marrying another one, coming back to the first wife, marrying her again. So you see how they're always making excuses, trying to find a loophole, find a little grey area. That's human nature, isn't it? But Yahusha hates divorce. And he says up here, that's this wife swapping thing, it's an abomination. So, he hates divorce. In fact, in Malachi 2, he says he outright hates it. Let's read that. You say all innocently, why isn't Yahuwah pleased with us? Because he witnesses you cheating on your wife, the woman you married when you were young. You entered a marriage covenant with her, but now you've broken that promise. Didn't Yahuwah create the man and the woman as one in the beginning, with a portion of his spirit within them? So what use is it them being alone and apart? He created the husband and wife for family, to reproduce, have children, and fill the earth. So pull yourself together and stop being so cruel to your wives. For I hate divorce, says Yahuwah, and anyone treating their wives in such a hideous, treacherous way. So knock it off. That's how Yahusha feels about divorce. He hates it. Because marriage is a shadow of what we're supposed to be having with him. So, no matter what loopholes the men of Israel think they've found, and no matter what reasons Yahusha allows, we've just read here firsthand how Yahusha really feels about divorce. He hates it. Hate is a pretty strong word, isn't it? There's no wiggle room. He's not impressed. And even if he's allowed it, or even done it himself with Israel, make no mistake, it's not what he intended or designed for his creation. The reason stated here in Deuteronomy for the first husband not being allowed to remarry the ex-wife is because she is now defiled. Therefore, if that first husband did such a thing as to remarry an ex-wife under these circumstances, he'd bring down that defilement upon the land of Israel. And the land is just way too set apart and special to allow that. When it says that the reason the man divorces his wife is because, depending on your translation, she loses favour within his eyes, or he finds something obnoxious or unclean about her, infidelity, or he hates her, or she displeases him, This is not an attempt to create an exhaustive list of divinely acceptable reasons for a man to divorce his wife. So different translations, some translations say she loses favour in his eyes, some translations say infidelity, sexual immorality, some translations say he just hates her, obnoxious, finds something unclean about her. You know, this isn't a list. It's not giving us a list of reasons why a man can divorce his wife. This is simply a general explanation that obviously the man doesn't want her anymore for whatever reason. And it is also not saying that it's fine in Yahusha's eyes either. It's not saying that it's fine in Yahusha's eyes either that a man doesn't really have a good reason to divorce her. So this divine law was so vague that was said, that's the thing. That was one of the main thrusts of divorce back here. That's why there's not much explanation given about divorce. That's why mankind or Yahusha ran with it and made up their other little rules and laws about it. And that's why it's so vague, because it was just a well-known principle. If you weren't happy in your marriage, you divorce your wife, whatever. But this divine law was so vague, and that's why we find Paul commenting on what he believes is the only good reason for divorce. And even then, the whole thing is very distasteful and ugly at best. The truth is that divorce is primarily a failure of marriage. Divorce is a failure of marriage. Who likes failing at things? Do you like failing at things? Getting things wrong? You know? Missing the mark? Who likes failing? Well, divorce means you failed at your marriage, isn't it? That is, while marriage is an institution, divorce is not an institution, but an improperly broken union. An improperly broken union. Remember also that in the scripture era, it was the men who did the divorcing. So don't stretch this meaning to say that while a man can divorce his wife for her adultery, a woman cannot divorce a man for his. According to this divine law in Deuteronomy 23, there is no objection to a man divorcing his wife, and technically vice versa, and then them getting remarried. So if they divorce each other and then get remarried, that's fine. There's no prohibition there. The prohibition against remarriage is only as concerns one partner getting married to another person in the interim. So you divorce your wife, maybe you made a mistake, maybe you get close to each other again and you get remarried, that's fine. Unless, you know, you've been with someone else, unless she's remarried someone else and been divorced again. You understand it? So this whole, back in the ancient times, this whole issue of divorce was so vague. That's why Paul came along and said this. Yahusha himself taught that married couples should stay together. A wife who leaves her husband should either stay single or go back to her husband. And a husband should not divorce his wife. Yeah? Regarding anything else to do with marriage, as far as I'm concerned, if your wife doesn't believe or follow Yahusha, but is still willing to stay and live with you, don't divorce her. Likewise, if your husband doesn't believe or follow Yahusha, but is willing to stay with you, don't divorce him. The unbelieving husband or wife is protected and made set apart through you. And this also makes your children clean and acceptable in Yahusha's sight. So he's talking about, you know, when, I mean, this is after the day of Pentecost, this is after when, you know, the Spirit has fallen and the portal is open, Yahusha's blood has, you know, made that possible. And it might be only one member of the family that gets Yahusha, that wants Yahusha. And he's saying, if that's the case, don't go divorcing one another just because you now have different beliefs. And that's where we find ourselves today in the 21st century, isn't it? Because we've all been raised. Very rarely have we been raised, any of us, in this truth. So if Yahusha's come to us, the fact that you're watching this video, I assume he has, very rarely does he come to, you know, a husband and a wife together. You know, if he does, wonderful. But even if he only comes to one of you, Paul's saying you should stay together. That's the ultimate goal. Stay together no matter what. Just because you've got different beliefs, you know, you were yoked before, you were equally yoked, and now that you've got different beliefs, now you're unequally yoked, but that doesn't mean you're divorced. Yahusha hates divorce. You know, stay away from divorce as far as you can, as much as possible. You know, stay clear of it if you can. So, even if you've got an unbeliever, but they're willing to live with you, stay together. Because the unbelieving husband or wife is protected and made set apart through you, and so are your children. However, and this however was more in my case, however, if an unbelieving husband or wife choose to be separated and be divorced, then you should allow it. You are no longer bound to that person, and they should not be forced to stay with you like a slave. Set them free, release them. After all, Yahusha chose you and wants you to live at peace. And besides, you, it should say, you don't know for sure whether you'll be able to save your unbelieving husband or wife. You don't know for sure whether you'll be able to save your unbelieving husband or wife. So that's not a reason to send them away. But if they choose to, don't want to stick around, don't like the changes you've made within yourself or the restrictions or following Yahusha's instructions, you know, there is a more subtle way to take it on, like through your behavior. Scripture says that the unbelieving husband or wife will be affected by the other's behavior. They'll see the change in your behavior, but that's not guaranteed. We live in a very fallen world, and a husband or wife might want their own way and might want to use this as an excuse to run for their life. Take the children, leave the children, whatever, what have you, you know. So Yahusha used his followers to re-explain the divine laws given to Moses and how to behave properly, of course with the goal of love. If the divine instructions are used to divide and destroy one another, then they aren't being done properly, are they? They aren't being done properly. Good fruit, behaviour, is produced by good trees, which is the condition of the soil and the heart. And of course, a bad fruit is produced by bad trees, and a broken marriage is certainly bad fruit in itself. It's easy to see a person interpreting and using Yahusha's instructions properly because the result of their tree, their behaviour, will be love. Their fruit will be love. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yahusha states that he hates divorce, so naturally, we all know that a primary target of Satan is to destroy all marriage, which is the foundational covenant formed in the bond of love and established by Yahusha himself at creation. It was all about the marriage home, wasn't it? We've been talking about that for over a year now. The perfected marriage home in the Garden of Eden. And that's the plan of restoration by Yahusha. He's been doing it for the last 6,000 odd years. So marriage, in the marriage home, the relationship between a husband and wife is supposed to emulate what was happening in that garden. When he created them, he didn't create them separated. He didn't create them separated, remember? They were one. In fact, she didn't even have a name. They were both called Adam in the beginning. There were two beings, but they were joined. How does that work? They were joined until they disobeyed, and there was a shift in the dimensions, shift in the relationship, a shift in every way. And that is when the scripture gives her a name, and that was 𝗂𝗓. So, and they now have totally different minds, as you've discovered if you're in a marriage relationship. You are not at all one, particularly when you first meet. But that's the goal of spending the time with your husband or wife over the span of however long you live. The goal is to become one, not to become gradually separated until you're both in separate bedrooms, watching separate TV shows, you know, having separate hobbies, separate friendship groups, separate country clubs, separate everything, you know, but we're still married, you know. That's not the goal, is it? You're supposed to become one, not further and further apart. So, and of course that only occurs if a wife can see her husband loving her It doesn't happen if a husband sees a wife respecting and no, it doesn't. The husband has to do it first. Got it? If your husband is an unbeliever, well, that's where wives have to step up, and depending on their husband's belief system, love him, support him, back him up, encourage him, obey him even, and still try to tap into the obedience of Yahusha as well if she's a believer and he's not. This is where the behaviour is where it comes. It's not about what you say. They don't want to hear what you have to say if they don't believe Yahusha, do they? The behaviour, let him have it. Don't take him personally. Let him have it. So Yahusha hates divorce. Yahusha said, "Did you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them both male and female?" And he said, "This is why a man must leave his father and mother to embrace and cherish his woman as they come together as one flesh. Therefore, if Yahuwah has joined two people together, no one is allowed to come between them and separate them." No one is allowed to come between them and separate them. They, the Pharisees, said to him, "Why then did Moses tell the men to give their wives a certificate of divorce and put them away?" See, always sneaky, having digs at him, trying to catch him out. This is how you know an argumentative, gutless, punsy, slimy religious behaviour. Still happening today. You only have to chat to people on Facebook, still here. You bring forth truth and they've always got a loophole. If that's right, then how come Moses said we can divorce each other? So Yahusha, as amazing as he is, Yahusha said to them, "Because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not the intended behaviour. And I say to you, whoever puts away his wife except on the grounds of whoring and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who has been put away commits adultery." Yeah? Did you notice Yahusha said, he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? So that was the goal. So you can see through the divine laws given through Moses here in Deuteronomy that he's sort of allowing for them, and in a very vague way, to divorce. But what does Yahusha say? Because Yahusha came along, he didn't put away, he didn't abolish anything about the divine laws or the instructions, not at all. He just re-explained them, breathed life into them, brought them into a new generation and said they're still legit. This is how you should behave them. Like we're doing today, after going through 1,000 years of dark ages and then slow restoration again, we're bringing the blood covenant in again, re-explaining it, redefining the behaviour, saying this is how we should behave. So Yahusha's saying, yeah, Moses allowed that. In other words, I allowed that because this is inspired. I allowed that back then because all your bloody hearts are so hard. But that's not what I intended, Yes, you are allowed to if there's whoring involved. But even so, even if there is, Yahusha wants restoration. So even if there was whoring, even if there was adultery, I'd prefer it if you forgave each other and tried to get past it and move on. Because you're married and nothing is supposed to split that apart. So, having said that, that's not the world we live in, is it? And while he's mainly talking to husbands, because the men were the only people who had the authority, the women didn't have the authority. Husbands, you're not allowed to put your wives away. Paul says, if someone's an unbeliever and they want to leave, well, in my case, my wife became an unbeliever. She said, "I'm sick of this religious experience." I wasn't in a religious experience. What she really meant was, I don't want Yahusha anymore. I pleaded with her. I said, "Oh, fine. What's the problem? I'm sick of having no friends. I don't want this weird belief anymore. I just want to do birthdays and Christmas and have family and friends and da-da-da-da." I said, "Would you prefer, if you want to put a Christmas tree up, do it. If you want to do this," even though I would hate it, it would drive me mad because Yahusha hates it. If it meant saving the marriage, yeah, fine, do it. But nothing I offered up would. Just don't love you anymore. I want to go. So this was about 3 years ago now, I think. So and I let her go. She took the kids and she moved out down the street. And after about a year, after about 6 months, she moved about 3,000 kilometres away, took all the kids with her. And that was probably, if the divorce wasn't the hardest thing to go through, losing all my kids was probably even harder. Again, because you can get past a marriage failing because it's an adult. And you can put it into perspective. You can face what you did wrong, the lack of love, concern, all the things a husband should be. Wife's gone mad, she wants to go, had a midlife crisis, wants to leave. You can come to terms with that. But then the children, you've let down your children. You're this, you're that, bombarded with all these thoughts, I lost about 20 kilos in, a month, didn't eat, like so distressed, waking up in the night, you're living a nightmare, Still had to get up, go to work, do what I had to do, but you're just dying, crumbling inside. And anyway, I just kept hearing Yahusha say, just wait. And people around me were encouraging me, just wait. You don't have to fight for your kids, just wait and see. I thought, oh, how are they going to see? They're going back to Sydney, the big city with all these hideous relatives, But sure enough, within 6 months, they were whinging, ringing me up. I want to come home and live with you. I said, I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to argue with your mother. I'm not going down that road. You'll hate it. You just have to wait until you're 14, 15 or whatever year it is you can decide where you want to live. Anyway, they drove her so crazy. And, she wanted to have her life and her go back to studying and have her party life and everything else that she wanted to do, friends and everything. She didn't want kids around for that. And her parents were fed up with 6 kids living with them. So, being a freeloader, so she rang up and said, I'd like all the kids to come and live with you. And I went, fantastic. And they've been with us for about 2, and since that time I had met Th` érèse, who has 2 children as well, and her husband had treated her really horribly and cheated on her and all sorts of things. So she was divorced, so we got together, and I'd been crying out for a wife. Some people, Paul says you can stay single, but I wanted a wife. I liked married life. I didn't feel like I'd missed out, hadn't missed out on my 20s or partying and all that stuff that my ex thought she'd missed out on. I'd missed out on everything. I got married young and I had children young. I missed out on everything, but I know what's in the world. You're not missing out on anything. So we've now got a blended family and 8 children up on the hill, and we're loving it. It's not easy, If you think it's hard going through a marriage with your own children, try going through a second marriage in a blended family, learning to adapt and love and accept and live with someone else's children. Yeah? Try that. And I brought 6 children to the table, So my wife's a trooper. She's amazing. Do I treat her as such? No. I'm talking to myself here as well. I don't love my wife all the time. I don't treat her very nicely. I go off my face, expect things, I'm giving this word to you today because it's from Yahusha, not because I can do it. Not at all because I can do it. I'm here, and I failed my first marriage. So I've got no right to tell any of you how to behave in your marriages of 10, 20, 30, 40 years, am I? But I am, I'm telling you. Because I failed the first one, and now I've taken on another one, so I had to start again. It's been 3 years now since I've been married again, so we go on. And the other thing I wanted to add to is I went through a hideous time realising, working out by scripture what am I supposed to do? I was willing to stick at it. I wasn't going to break my marriage covenant, No matter what she was doing or saying or going out and doing, I wasn't going to break it. No, because I love Yahusha. But when someone else breaks it and goes, after a while I realised I think Yahusha set me free. Because I was just crying out, trying anything and everything to try and wake her up, and it doesn't work. And now that I see in hindsight after a few years where she's gone and what she's done in the world, I realised there's nothing I could have done. And I don't feel as responsible for her anymore because I realised this was all her. Satan took her. She wanted the world and everything in it. So it took, and she knew I wasn't going to compromise. You know, you can compromise a little bit and try things and do things to, and walk alongside somebody until they see, but no, she didn't want that. She just wanted to go. So what does Paul say? Let them go. If they want to go, let them go. Don't treat them like a slave and make them stay. Let them go. She went. She's gone mad into the world. So, you know, that's done. And I asked Yahusha for a wife. I went through all the into the online swill of dating. I thought, I'm not going to look for a believer because they're all in America. They're too far away. It's too expensive. And I dated a couple of believers in America, and that was really hard. Really hard. The distance is torture. So in the end, I thought I'm just going to look and see and take my time. And it was just hideous online because everybody's just all, you know, depraved. And, you know, it's hard to even go out to dinner with a woman because everybody's the men are so predatory, you know. So anyway, when I was about to get rid of all those apps and disconnect from all of them and fed up with it all, Therese came along and she'd been fed up with it too, and we struck up a conversation. And the thing about this is I said to her up front, because, you know, obviously a man and a woman, when they get to know each other, they want to get together and, you know, consummate. And I explained, this is what I did. I said to her, I told her what I believe, and said, you know, I can't have, in other words, long story short, so I can't have sex with you because to me sex is marriage, you know. And so if you want to be with me, this is what I believe. You don't have to believe it, but you have to acknowledge the fact that if we go down that road, you are my wife, you know, and I'm your husband. And not pieces of paper or legal agreements or anything like that. That's the world's way of doing it. If you're going to be with me, this is what I'm taking. This is how I see it. And she agreed totally. And she became my wife. And then later on, just to keep the family happy, we took some photos and, you know, put her in a dress and all that jazz. But, you know, it's a marriage covenant. Realize that? He's bringing two people together for the purpose of becoming one. And through those two people becoming one, he's teaching us how we are to become one with him. Yeah? Through communication, through love, you know, through intimacy. Let's read this here. This was really good. This was an article I found on the Fossilized Customs website, and I've just tinkered with it a bit. But it's called Abomination or Marriage. The real thing exposes the artificial. So automatically we know from that word there that it's talking about the LGBT thing, or the true marriage. What is it? Whether a relationship is an abomination or a marriage depends solely on whose perspective is considered. Marriage has always been the covenant bond from which a human family results, and offspring is the goal. The persons involved, the state or a religious institution, cannot establish a marriage, since the Creator is the only one who brings together the components for which they were created. The persons involved, the state or a religious institution, can only accept or reject this truth. Yeah? They can't form it. Only Yahusha can bring people together. The facilitator of marriage is Yahusha. He is the potter, we are the clay. Only what he calls a marriage is what matters. Only what he calls a marriage matters. And only what he calls an abomination matters too. Of course, we've been dealing with that the last few episodes. The LGBTQI. The state or religious institution cannot create the covenant of marriage. It is only assumed. Yahusha alone brings together who he does to serve his purposes. Yahusha loves marriage. You want to tap into what Yahusha loves? He loves marriage. Loves the marriage relationship. Yeah. You can still tap into that if you're a single person. And if you want to be a married person, then work on yourself. Work on your appearance, work on your behavior. You know, go places where you see other people. They don't have to be believers. In fact, seeing how insane the believers are online and in person, you know, when you look out into the world, I decided I'd much rather be with an unbeliever because at least my behavior, at least you're dealing with a clean slate. You know what I'm saying? You're not dealing with all this religious stuff, you know? And religion is really inbred in people. It's really hard to get that out of people. Whereas if people aren't brought up in any kind of religion, it's worldliness, they're kind of ignorant to it. And so when they feel a love that you have from Yahusha, and that's what affected my wife after the hard life she'd had, the love is what drew her. So that's why if you want a husband or a wife, go and find one. Don't wait for it to fall in your lap, you know. Go and find one. Go and get a nice haircut. Go and buy some nice aftershave or some perfume and some nice clothes. Go and meet people. Get into the local pub. I'm not saying you have to go and get drunk. I'm just saying go where people are, you know. Whatever you're interested in, join a group, an online group, whatever hobbies you are, go around people that are into those things, or just anywhere, anytime, or even just a dating app in general. You got to, you know, wade through all the filth. But if you're tapping into Yahusha, he'll send someone to you. He knows where the person is. You don't. You just got to wait. But work on yourself in the interim, you know. If you're overweight, go and do some exercise and get healthy. If you've got hideous looking hair, go and get a haircut, a nice colour or something like that. You know, work on yourself. Work it out if you want to be with somebody. You know, would you want to be with you the way you look and behave? No? Well, why would anybody else? So, you know, what were we talking about? Yahusha loves marriage. Tapping into what Yahusha loves. That's what we were talking about. So as a single person, you can still tap into what Yahusha loves. If you don't want to be married or with anybody, there's nothing wrong with that either. That's fine. The marriage you're tapping into is your marriage with him. But if you want to be with somebody, then go and find someone. Yahusha loves marriage and hates divorce. And of course, Satan is the exact opposite. So that's why Satan hates all marriage, and he's going to come between them all the time, you know? Whisper things in your ear and whisper things in her ear, and, you know, whisper things all the time to try and make you hate each other. Question: if a person is legally separated from their spouse, legally separated, what BS is that? If a person is legally separated from their spouse and have not divorced, can the separated person date or fall in love with another and have a relationship until they divorce their former spouse? Answer: the separation itself in Yahusha's eyes is a divorce. Just because the world's got a clause that says you've got to be separated a certain time before you can legally be divorced, that's the world. The fact that you've separated, the fact that you've moved out, you know, or moved into separate rooms if you're on the way of being out, you know, you've separated, so you're divorced. The separation itself in Yahusha's eyes is a divorce, if you think carefully about what it means to not be with your spouse. We are united by Yahusha as one, and he hates what we call divorce. We are here to help one another. He has no concern whatsoever with what men call legal separation. If we are not with our spouse, we are neglecting our spouse. If we are not with our spouse, we are neglecting our spouse. I felt horrible about, this article's been up there for years. I felt horrible reading this because I thought, I'm neglecting it. Like I know what I did in the marriage. I wasn't there all the time. I had other projects and things in my mind. I was angry a lot, you know, didn't love her like I could. That was me. But I was willing to stick at it and work on it. She'd gone. So I felt guilty for so long until eventually I got remarried and I came into a new relationship and I realised I couldn't have done anything about that, you know. We were volatile. It was a volatile relationship from day one, you know. It wasn't, you know. And then you go through the guilt and what was the purpose? What was the purpose of all that? 15 years, what was the purpose? And the only good thing that I can realise is Yahusha gave me 6 wonderful children. If that's what he brought us together for, then great. She's 3,000 kilometres away now and I barely ever hear about it or from her. The kids don't even hear about it or say much about her anymore. So sad, but that's the truth. So this to me doesn't apply to me because my ex-wife is not my spouse anymore. And that wasn't by my doing. So this is where you've got to work out your deliverance, make up your mind if there's something you can do. You know, I would have gone to the ends of the earth to try and work it out, but it takes 2 people, doesn't it? If they're not willing, you don't have to be, you know, guilty for that, you know. So this statement, yeah, that's what I felt bad about. If we're not with our spouse, we're neglecting our spouse. Yahusha would have the same opinion today as he had 2,000 years ago. There's no allowance for falling in love with someone else in his instructions, because Yahusha is all about restoration and forgiveness. So while Moses is coming forward and saying you're not allowed to divorce each other and all this wife swapping stuff, that's not how I saw my situation. Not at all. I wasn't divorcing her to marry someone else. Divorce, marry, just so I could sleep with different people. Not at all. This was in one way, it was Yahusha cleaning out. He had plans and purposes for me and my family, and she was just digging her heels in. And you know what he said? There's plenty of scriptures that can relate to it. If you won't go along with Yahusha, branches that don't bear fruit get cut off. All sorts of analogies that you can find in scripture. So, cut off, Yahusha is all about restoration and forgiveness. So if you can, it's best to be restored, forgive each other and get on with it. But it takes two people to do that, doesn't it? If we see ourselves in a relationship with him as a marriage, and we understand if we see ourselves in our relationship with him as a marriage, and we understand that he went to great lengths to reconnect and restore us to himself by surrendering and dying to himself, then husbands should love their wives in the same way in order to rescue them if they're unbelieving. And likewise, a wife will save her husband too through her behavior of loving obedience and respect. Nothing else will work. Nothing else will work. If we are serious about him truly living in us, we no longer live, but he lives through us. Our whole being is dedicated to him, and our life while in the flesh becomes his vessel. We're talking about that, weren't we? Stepping aside within yourself, getting out of the way, letting him take over. If our fruits, our behavior are not his, we are holding back something from him. He wants all of us all the time. We should seek to be so dedicated to our spouse in the same way. So we should move on because we've got some more scripture to get through. That's the main thrust of the marriage and divorce topic today, guys. Try and make it work if you can. If it's too late, then make your peace with it. If you need to apologize, repent to Yahusha, of course, but if you need to make things right with the other person, because so many people I speak to online or leave comments, I've gone through hideous child custody battles and, divorce lawyers and all sorts of things, and it's horrible. And it's very hard to come back from that. So if you can't come back from it, just be civil, be pleasant, be kind, and leave it at that. And go on with your life with Yahusha. That's all you can do. Leave it in the revision mirror and keep going. But if they're willing to work with you, and particularly when there's children involved, if they're willing to be there and work on it, then you should. You should, definitely should. Because Yahusha, this is the point of this video, Yahusha loves marriage and he hates divorce. So, next, let's go on. If a man and a woman have been married less than 1 year, he must not be sent off to war or sent away to do forced labour. He must be allowed to stay home for a year and get to know his wife and be happy with her. In other words, to start a family. Not just to be happy so they can shag all day and honeymoon mindset. No, it means to start a family. Remember, we're going into Canaan now, and it's going to take years for this war. They're going to be warring for years. So if you just got married, on the surface, this just seems like a very nice thing to do. Giving a new bride and groom a year to be together and enjoy each other's company before the husband has to leave for war. But the happiness that the man brings his new wife has more to do with her getting pregnant and giving birth than simply the pleasure and excitement typical of newlyweds. Although allowing time for that indeed is part of the purpose. Unlike today, where recently married couples try to put off having children until they have settled into their married life and had a sufficient amount of time as just a couple, in the scriptural era, it was the greatest hope that on their wedding night, the new wife would actually become pregnant. Because having children and hopefully a son was everything for a new family, and especially so in the case where a man is soon leaving to fight in a battle with the real possibility that he may die. Having a son meant that a man's life essence and bloodline would carry on. And for the wife, it meant that she would not have to bear the shame of having been married but not producing children. Remember, for the Hebrews, the primary duty they bore in the blood covenant promised to Abraham. For the Hebrews, the primary duty they bore in the blood covenant promised to Abraham was to be fruitful, reproduce. For a man and woman to fail to procreate was a failure to live up to the blood covenant. And so it was a very serious matter that brought great public shame. So you even get a year off work. Get cracking, mate. Get the family happening. When you lend money to people, you are allowed to keep something of theirs as a guarantee that they will pay you back the loan. But don't take one or both of their millstones, or else they may starve. They need these stones for grinding grain into flour to make bread. No matter what the situation might be, it is morally reprehensible to take from a person the only means they have to make a living, especially when it is merely to guarantee or satisfy a loan. You know, that'd be like the bank taking my cutting scissors off me and then saying, good luck. How am I going to repay the loan? I haven't got any way to cut hair. You've taken my tools off me. So you take something else off them. Don't take their means of an income, you know. If you're guilty of kidnapping Israelites, if you're guilty of kidnapping Israelites and forcing them into slavery, you will be put to death to remove this evil from the community. Yeah? Kidnapping. Evil. In battle, it was perfectly usual for the victors to take people and use them as slaves. This was not considered kidnapping, but rather the spoils of war. In addition, especially among Israel, it was usual that the women and children would be assimilated into Israeli society rather than being viewed as property of some particular individual. We have seen in earlier laws that mistreatment of slaves and servants, foreigner or Hebrew, is banned. A good example of this was the Shechem incident, when Levi and Simeon massacred all the adult males, and the women and children of the city were taken as slaves. Basically, this meant that they were forcibly added to the population of Israel. Yet at the same time, they were not considered subhuman or people to mercilessly use for cheap labour. Moses says, I've told the priests what to do if any of you have a skin infection. So do exactly what they say, and remember what Yahuwah your Elohim did to Miriam after you left Egypt. One minute he's talking about skin infection, and the next he's talking about Miriam. So there's a connection there. Of course, we know Miriam got the skin infection. Her face went white, she had all the sores all over her. Some translations say leprosy, but that's not accurate. That didn't come in until later on. This is a skin infection, skin disease. So it's tying it together. Only the priesthood can deal with a skin infection. Why? Because it is primarily a spiritual issue. What? We dealt with this, remember, in Leviticus. A skin infection, a lot of the time, outward sicknesses is to do with a spiritual issue. And that's why the priesthood is involved, because it's primarily a spiritual issue, and only to a lesser degree it is a medical problem. It is seen as an outward result of an inner state of ritual defilement and an outward illustration of how Yahusha sees the inner spiritual condition of humans: diseased, corrupt, and unclean. Therefore, when a Hebrew had an outbreak of infection on their skin, they were separated from the rest of Israel. They were forcibly put outside the camp if they balked at going out on their own volition. And outside the camp, they remained until there was no further sign of this skin infection. And for some Israelites, that would be for the remainder of their lives. We've dealt with all this. When you lend money to people, you're allowed to keep something of theirs as a guarantee that the money will be paid back. But you must not go into their house and get it yourself. Wait outside and they will bring out the item you've agreed on. Suppose someone is so poor that a coat is the only thing that can be offered as a guarantee on a loan. Don't keep the coat overnight. Instead, give it back before sunset so the owner can keep warm and sleep, and ask Yahuwah to bless you, and he will notice that you have done the right thing. If you hire poor people to work for you, don't hold back their pay, whether they are a Israelite or a foreigner who lives in your town. Pay them their wages at the end of each day, because they live in poverty and need the money to survive. If you don't pay them on time, they will complain about you to Yahuwah, and he'll punish you. Parents must not be put to death for crimes committed by their children, and children must not be put to death for crimes committed by their parents. Don't put anyone to death for someone else's crime. That was interesting, that one. That is, the parents may not be put to death for something their children did and vice versa. This is a substantial difference between this instruction. There is a substantial difference between this instruction and a principle of vertical retribution. We dealt with that. Vertical retribution, where the punishment of your punishment can be put off for generations. Oh, it's written here. Which puts the punishment for trespassing against Yahusha upon descendants several generations down the track. This is something that might sound strange to us, but it was real and practiced by the Hebrews. We occasionally talk about generational curses that are the result of what the affected person might have done. But of course, if we talk about generational curses that are the result not of what the affected person might have done, but of something that person's father or grandfather or even earlier ancestors might have done. The difference between this law against transgenerational punishment and vertical retribution is that vertical retribution is not part of the civil or criminal law code. Vertical retribution is decided on and carried out exclusively by Yahusha. It is his prerogative to decide in what situation to invoke the principle of vertical retribution or not. The law banning transgenerational punishment, on the other hand, has to do with humans carrying out the justice system that Yahusha has established. For example, if a son committed a murder, the father does not owe his own life, and so a court may not order a father to be executed. Only the perpetrator is liable for his capital offence. Make sure that orphans and foreigners are treated fairly, and if you lend money to a widow and want to keep something of hers to guarantee that she will pay you back, don't take any of her clothes. Remember, you were slaves in Egypt until Yahuwah, your Elohim, rescued you, and that's why I'm giving you these divine laws. If you forget to bring in a stack of harvested grain, don't go back in the field to get it. Leave it for the poor, including foreigners, orphans and widows, and Yahuwah will make you successful in everything you do. And when you harvest your olives, don't try to get them all for yourself, but leave some for the poor. And when you pick your grapes, go over the vines only once, then let the poor have what is left. You lived in poverty as slaves in Egypt until Yahuwah your Elohim rescued you. So that's why I'm giving you these divine laws. Common sense, guys. Humanitarianism, love and kindness. Not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. The feeling behind it is love. Loving one another. That's why Yahusha said, to summarize all those instructions, love your neighbour. Love Yahuwah your Elohim and love your neighbour as yourself. Yeah? He wasn't replacing them all. He was just summarizing. The spirit behind it is love, and that spirit behind it transcends all time. So today, even though the instructions are still there, a lot of the instructions don't really gel or click with us in the 21st century, but loving Yahuwah and loving your neighbor does, because that's a behavior that doesn't change. So before we finish, there was just this interesting side point on one of the commentaries I found interesting. Interesting side point about the generations. When Yahusha spoke to Abraham that his descendants would be led into captivity and remain there for 4 generations, how long is a generation? Interesting. Or more importantly, what is a generation? Do you remember that? When Yahusha said to Abraham, your descendants will be going into captivity and remain there for 4 generations. What is a generation? How long is a generation? The 4 generations that were prophesied consisted of Abraham, 1, Isaac, 2, Jacob, 3, and Jacob's 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel, 4. It wouldn't be until those 12 tribes, the 4th generation from Abraham, were fully established and brought to some divinely designated state of fruitfulness and maturity that Yahusha would liberate them from captivity and bring them to the land that he had promised Abraham, which is where we're about to go in Joshua. So the 4 generations in this prophecy was not so much about a precisely defined measurement of time as it was about the event, the Exodus, occurring with the 4th generation, the generation of the 12 tribes as the participants. And of course, as we've read in the scriptures, they went into Egypt 70 odd people and they left nearly 3 million. So it's not really a major exodus for one family to just, see you guys, we just thought we'd leave now. That's not an exodus, is it? That's just a coming and going. but for 3 million people, a whole nation, to leave under the signs and wonders that happened is just an amazing miracle. And of course, that was what it was for. He didn't just put his people into slavery for the fun of it. It was to bring them out with a certain mindset, to wash their minds so that they would know what the world is like. So then they bring them to the mountain and marry them, So it's all about marriage. Yahusha loves marriage, hates divorce. Always keep that in your mind, So if you've been through marriage and you've been through divorce, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, divorce. But after you've gone through it, you don't have that fear anymore, because Yahusha is with you and he carries you through everything. So still not the ultimate thing to do. If you can save your marriage, save it. If you can, the whole idea is to come down, lead from down there, lead by example, lead through your behavior. Don't take anything personally. If your wife is nuts, face it. Even if she's come into Yahusha and been immersed, even if you've been together for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, been immersed together, whatever situation you're in, face. Don't just assume that this person is one flesh with you, even though technically you might be because you're married. Face through your eye holes without judgment what they are. If they're nuts, moody, upset, this, that, and husbands the same. Wives, face it. If your husband's a moody asshole, face it, grumpy, arrogant, face what they are without judgment. Discern, face it. And don't take it personally, as hard as that is. Don't take it personally. Let them have that, because if you let them have that, the scripture says if you love someone or you're kind to someone who hatefully persecutes you, hates you and gives you pressure, it's like dumping hot coals on their head. You want that, like last episode, you want the branding iron, the words, the living words, the flogging to come onto them. It's through your behaviour. This behaviour can save your marriage. I hadn't mastered this behaviour, still haven't, but I didn't know it like I know it now. I couldn't do it in my last marriage. And even if I could have, she didn't want it anyway. But this wife I've got now is amazing, and she's willing to go there with me in every way possible, So go there with your husbands and your wives, guys. Why?